I always knew I was the invisible one. My parents had their favorite, and it wasn't me. My brother got everything. Tuition paid in full, private schools, the latest gadgets, even trips abroad just because they could. And me? I was left to fend for myself. Scholarships, part-time jobs, late nights filled with ramen and textbooks, they were my reality. I remember the first time I felt the sting of it. I was 8, clutching a handmade drawing I had spent hours perfecting, and I proudly presented it to my mom. She glanced at it, nodded politely, and then turned her attention to my brother, who had just brought home a participation ribbon. "Good job, sweetie," she said to him, showering him with praise and hugs. I watched, stunned, as my own effort vanished into thin air. That's when I learned that no matter how hard I tried, my work, my achievements, my very existence didn't seem to matter. Through the years, it only got worse. I graduated high school with honors. My name was on the dean's list. I had awards stacked on my desk. But when I told my parents, I got a shrug. "That's nice," my father muttered, barely looking up from his phone. My brother, meanwhile, was already being celebrated for joining the family legacy of expensive universities. My parents didn't see the late nights, the part-time jobs, the sleepless weekends. They didn't see me. I tried to explain how hard I had worked, how I had applied for scholarships, fought for internships, begged for their support in subtle ways. But their answer was always the same. "We can't afford it." Their words didn't sting because they were true. They stung because I knew they could afford it if they wanted to. It was never about money. It was about favoritism, about someone else being the golden child, while I was the invisible one left to fight for scraps. I started to understand that love, in their eyes, was conditional. Achievements weren't celebrated equally. Effort didn't matter. I wasn't invisible because I was unremarkable. I was invisible because they chose to see someone else instead. And for a long time, that knowledge burned inside me quietly, a slow, smoldering fire, but I didn't let it consume me. I didn't collapse under their indifference. I learned to fight quietly, to build myself up in silence, while they remained distracted by my brother's every move. I worked 3 jobs through college: tutoring, waitressing, freelancing. My dorm room was tiny. My meals were often instant noodles or leftover cafeteria scraps, and I spent nights poring over textbooks, while my brother partied at school events I could only dream of attending. And yet, every award, every honor, every scholarship was proof that I was doing more than surviving. I was thriving. I was carving out a life for myself without their support, without their praise, and without their recognition. But deep down, I knew that their indifference was a wound that hadn't healed. I wanted them to see me, not just as a child, but as someone who could succeed against all odds, someone who could rise above neglect and favoritism. And I made a promise to myself, silently, in the quiet corners of my dorm room during those lonely nights. One day, I would make them notice. One day, they would see the child they ignored, the one they never thought could make it. One day, I would walk across that stage, and their faces would change forever. Because sometimes being invisible isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of it. And what I had planned for graduation would be a moment they'd never forget. College was a battlefield, and I entered it knowing I had no armor. My parents refused to fund my tuition, claiming that scholarships and part-time jobs were enough for me. Meanwhile, my brother breezed through the same years, supported in every way, shielded from responsibility, and praised for every small achievement. Watching him live a life I had to fight for made my blood boil, but it also fueled a determination I couldn't ignore. I learned quickly how to survive. 3 jobs became my lifeline: tutoring underclassmen, waiting tables at a crowded cafe, and freelancing as a graphic designer for small clients I found online. Every dollar mattered, every hour counted. My dorm room was barely big enough to fit a bed and a desk. Most nights I fell asleep hunched over my textbooks, exhausted, yet still dreaming bigger than anyone had ever expected me to. It wasn't easy. I missed out on parties, social events, and spontaneous trips, while my brother flew to Europe for a summer program. I celebrated landing a $500 scholarship that barely covered textbooks, but I thrived despite the obstacles. I applied for internships relentlessly, staying up late into the night crafting the perfect cover letters and portfolios. I networked with professors, attended every seminar, and took every opportunity to learn skills that would put me ahead in life. Even then, the hardest part wasn't the work. It was the silence from my parents. I'd call home to tell them about my achievements, hoping for even a hint of pride. Instead, I got a distracted, "That's nice, sweetie," before they went back to their conversation about my brother's latest internship or his summer trip. It was like shouting into a void. My accomplishments were invisible to them, irrelevant to their world. And yet, I kept going. Every late night, every skipped social event, every meal of instant noodles or cafeteria leftovers, it all became fuel. I wasn't just surviving. I was building a foundation, a life that didn't need their approval. My grades soared, professors recommended me for honors programs, and I even secured internships that paid more than my parents had ever earned in a month. I was quietly proving to the world, and to myself, that I could succeed without their support. Meanwhile, my brother stumbled. He struggled with assignments, skipped classes, and yet my parents bailed him out at every turn. They didn't question him, didn't challenge him to stand on his own. It was infuriating, and at times humiliating, to see their unwavering support for him contrasted with their indifference to me. But instead of letting jealousy consume me, I turned it into strategy. I learned patience. I learned to wait for the right moment. I learned that success achieved quietly, without recognition, could hit harder than any insult, any slight, any favoritism ever could. By senior year, I had built a record that spoke for itself, top of my class. Multiple internships, awards, and a scholarship that covered almost all my tuition. Yet my parents remained oblivious, dismissive, and preoccupied with my brother's life. The sting of neglect was always there, but so was a growing sense of power. I was strong, independent, unstoppable. And as graduation approached, I realized something. This was my moment. Not just to succeed, but to make them see me, the child they had ignored, the one they had underestimated. Little did they know, the invisible child they had dismissed would soon be the one holding the spotlight. The one they had ignored would walk across the stage and change everything. And when that moment came, it wouldn't just be a celebration. It would be a reckoning. Senior year was a whirlwind, and the closer graduation came, the more I felt the tension building inside me. Every accomplishment I achieved seemed to vanish into thin air in my parents' eyes. While my friends and classmates were being congratulated, celebrated, and photographed for social media, my parents still had only eyes for my brother. He had secured a high-paying internship, they gushed. He got invited to an exclusive networking event, they praised him. And me? My awards, my honors, my countless late nights and sacrifices. Barely a word. It hurt more than I expected. I kept asking myself, why am I invisible? I had done everything right. I had worked harder than anyone I knew, endured more struggle, and built a life of independence from scratch. And yet, they still treated me as if I were secondary, as if my achievements were small or unimportant. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it wasn't about their approval. But every time I heard them brag about my brother, the old wound burned fresh. Things escalated when my brother's struggles in college became obvious. He failed midterms, skipped mandatory workshops, and missed deadlines, yet my parents swooped in every time to rescue him. Each call I overheard, the whispers of concern, the frantic emails, the frantic offers to fix things, made my blood boil. They were ignoring my effort while cleaning up his mistakes. They never realized that I had already been doing everything they were now scrambling to do for him, but on my own. Even outside of school, their favoritism was glaring. I applied for internships at top companies, and when I got accepted, I quietly celebrated in my room, texting my parents a polite note. I got the internship. Their reply? Nothing. No congratulations, no pride, no excitement. Meanwhile, my brother would stumble through interviews, barely prepared, and my parents would lavish praise on him for trying so hard. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was anger. Anger at their blindness, their injustice, and their refusal to see me as their own child with potential. And yet, I couldn't let that anger cloud me completely. I needed control. I needed focus. I realized that while my brother thrived under their favoritism, I had a secret weapon, my independence, my resilience, and the fire they had ignited in me by ignoring me. As graduation approached, the stakes became higher. Every email, every phone call, every late-night cram session felt like preparation for the ultimate moment. The day I would step onto that stage and show the world what they had refused to see. But I also knew it wasn't just about recognition. I wanted them to feel the weight of their choices, to experience that sharp, undeniable sting of realization that they had overlooked their own child while raising a golden one on easy terms. I watched my brother struggle and falter, and I kept my head down, refusing to gloat. But I planned carefully. Every award I displayed, every honor I mentioned casually to relatives or friends, was part of the bigger picture. I didn't need to confront them now. The time for confrontation would come naturally. Their faces would change when they finally realized who had succeeded without their help, who had quietly endured everything and come out stronger. And deep inside, I began to feel a strange thrill. The fire of neglect had turned into something else, power. I realized that I didn't just want their acknowledgement. I wanted them to understand the cost of ignoring me. I wanted them to see that their favoritism had created a child who didn't just survive, it thrived. Graduation day was coming. And when it did, everything would change, not just for me but for them. The final week before graduation was unbearable. Every family conversation seemed like a battlefield, and I was a silent observer of favoritism that never wavered. My parents had already begun planning my brother's celebration. A fancy dinner, a weekend getaway, and even a gift that cost more than my entire college tuition. Meanwhile, I kept quiet, pretending to be fine, hiding the storm brewing inside me. The night before graduation, we gathered for a small family dinner. My parents talked endlessly about my brother, his internship, his network of friends, how the university had recognized his potential. I tried to share my own news, the honors, the awards, the leadership positions I'd earned, but their eyes skimmed past me, as if I were background noise. And then it happened. I overheard my father speaking to my uncle, voice low but sharp. Honestly, she's lucky she even got a scholarship. She wouldn't have survived without it. We did what we could, but she's just different. Not like her brother. My chest tightened. My stomach turned cold. The words cut deeper than any fight, any argument I had endured over the years. They had dismissed me, not just with neglect, but with a quiet, almost casual belief that I was inherently less, that I was expendable, that my struggles were irrelevant. I sat there, smiling politely while a storm raged inside me. I wanted to yell, to cry, to throw plates across the table, but I didn't. I realized then that this betrayal wasn't just a moment. It was years of being unseen, uncelebrated, and undervalued by the people who were supposed to love me most. Every sacrifice I'd made, every hardship I'd endured, every sleepless night, every tear shed in silence. It had all been ignored, minimized, erased. The betrayal wasn't just in their words. It was in every action that had led to this moment. Their favoritism, their indifference, their constant comparisons between me and my brother, it all became crystal clear. I had grown up in a household that taught me I had to fight alone, that love was conditional, and that recognition was something I had to earn without support. And in that instant, I understood something else. They had underestimated me. Completely. That night, I went to my dorm and sat with my diploma, my awards, my scholarships laid out in front of me. I thought about every year I had worked twice as hard, every rejection I had faced, every moment of isolation I had endured, and I realized that this betrayal, as painful as it was, had made me stronger, smarter, more determined. I also realized that I had something my brother, and until now my parents, didn't: perspective. I had the clarity to see their favoritism for what it truly was, and the patience to wait for the right moment to show them what they had missed. This wasn't just about recognition. It was about proving to them, once and for all, that I was capable of extraordinary things on my own terms. I smiled then, quietly, almost cruelly, because I knew that graduation day wasn't just my ceremony, it was my stage. And my parents, they were about to witness for the first time the full weight of their oversight. The child they had ignored, the one they had deemed less, was about to rise and shine in a way they couldn't ignore, deny, or control. The betrayal had been deep, but it had also been the catalyst. It had fueled every late night, every sacrifice, every moment of relentless effort. And now, with graduation hours away, I felt an almost intoxicating sense of power. Their indifference had created the exact outcome they would fear the most. I had become unstoppable without their help, and I was ready. I stopped thinking about dramatic confrontations and started engineering a moment they couldn't ignore. Revenge, I decided, wouldn't be loud or petty. It would be unavoidable, precise, and public. If they loved spectacle for my brother, then I would give them a spectacle they couldn't clap through or scroll past. I wanted their faces to change in a way words never could. Slow, pale, then empty with the knowledge that they had raised the wrong child. First, I mapped the terrain. Graduation day was the obvious stage, but the ceremony itself was crowded and chaotic, too easy to miss a single person. So I planned layers: the ceremony, the after-party, and the network that mattered. I reached out to the people who had seen me grind in quiet rooms, professors who had recommended me, supervisors who had offered jobs, and the classmates who knew the real story behind my resume. I asked them for help, not for sympathy. I wanted credibility in the room, allies who could speak louder than a family's comfortable assumptions. Second, I curated proof. I gathered emails, recommendation letters, internship offers, scholarship confirmations, every piece of paper, and every digital thread that traced my journey. I compiled a portfolio that told the story my parents refused to hear. The late nights that won grants, the tiny freelance contracts that paid rent, the innovation awards that meant more than their hollow praise. I printed parts of it, framed others, and saved key messages in a presentation I could show without needing permission. Third, I controlled perception. I made strategic posts on social media, careful, understated, and timed. Not the bragging posts my brother would wear like armor, but quiet, factual posts. A photo with my dean, a congratulatory note from a CEO I interned with, a snapshot of the scholarship email. I tagged people I knew my parents followed, family friends, relatives who loved to comment and share. When your parents see their world echoing your accomplishments back to them, it hits differently than a direct plea. The goal was to create a chorus outside our home that would finally make them tune in. Fourth, I crafted the moment. On graduation day, I would walk across that stage with a small, seemingly ordinary gesture, a printed program placed on the front row seat of the family section. It wasn't just any program. It contained an insert I had designed, a single page that read, simply and plainly, the cost of my journey and the names of those who helped me get there. Scholarships, mentors, internships, and the dollar amounts that had kept me afloat. Alongside it, I arranged for a friend, one of the faculty mentors, to stand up during the reception and make an offhand toast that was anything but offhand. To the student who taught us how to persist, she'd say, and then she would hand my mentor the microphone to tell, briefly, the story of how I'd built a career without family funding. I also reserved a seat at the dean's reception for a hiring manager from the firm that had offered me a full-time position. I made sure the manager knew exactly who my family was. I wanted them to pass by, to congratulate me, loudly, professionally, in front of my parents. There is a peculiar sting when your parents hear strangers praise what they refuse to praise. It's validation wrapped in the public language they respect. Titles, salaries, job offers, but I didn't aim to humiliate. My plan was surgical, not cruel. I wanted their shame to be coupled with possibility, the realization that they had a child who could stand independently, not a failure who needed their constant rescue. So when the moment came, I prepared my own words too, a short, measured message in my graduation speech submission. I didn't rant. I didn't point fingers. I thanked mentors, called out the community that had supported me, and ended with a line designed to land in their chest. Some of us learned to fly with open hands. Others learned to fly because the hands were never offered. I rehearsed every step until it felt effortless. The printed insert, the social posts, the faculty toast, the hiring manager's public congratulations, and my carefully worded sentence. Together they formed a narrative that would be unmistakable. When my parents sat through it, They couldn't dismiss it as luck or coincidence. They would see timelines, endorsements, names of institutions, and the visible aftermath, offers and handshakes. Their preferred story about who I was would be disrupted by evidence and witnesses. Finally, I braced for aftermath. I expected awkward silences, forced smiles, perhaps even defensive denial. That was fine. The point wasn't to punish forever. It was to relocate truth into the light. I wanted them to feel the hollow of a missed chance, the weight of years when they had chosen to see only one child. And if they asked for explanation, I would give it calmly. If they remained silent, I would keep moving forward, with the people who had actually supported me. This was not petty revenge. This was reclamation, of dignity, of recognition, and of the right to be seen. When the day came, every element clicked into place like a key in a lock. The quiet proof I'd assembled spoke louder than any accusation. Their faces changed, exactly as I had imagined, not with fury, but with something sharper. Recognition dawning too late. And in that space between their silence and my step off the stage, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Not the satisfaction of hurting them, but the release of finally being visible on my own terms. Graduation day arrived with a weight I could almost touch. The auditorium buzzed with excitement, caps clattering and families chattering, but I felt a strange calm. Every detail I had planned, the inserts, the social posts, the faculty toast, the hiring manager's presence, was in place. I walked in quietly, my cap low, my gown crisp, a small smile playing on my lips. My parents were there, of course, beaming with pride, but entirely in my brother's direction. Their attention had not wavered. Not yet. As the ceremony progressed, I waited. Each student walked across the stage, applause ringing, diplomas exchanged. And then it was my turn. I walked with measured steps, my gaze sweeping across the audience. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady, confident, anchored by years of preparation. I reached the stage. The dean shook my hand, and I received my diploma. The applause swelled, polite and expected, but it was what came next that mattered. I placed the printed insert carefully on the front row seat where my parents were sitting. I made sure it was visible, angled perfectly, so they couldn't miss it. Then, as planned, my faculty mentor stood during the reception toast and began speaking. "There's a student here today who exemplifies perseverance," she said, her voice ringing through the hall. "Through scholarships, late nights, and relentless effort, she has achieved what many thought impossible without support from home. Let's honor her journey." My parents shifted in their seats. They looked at each other, confusion flickering across their faces. And then, one by one, people began walking up, shaking my hand, congratulating me, friends, professors, and finally, the hiring manager from the firm that had offered me a coveted full-time position. Each handshake, each public praise was magnified in front of my parents, and I saw it, their expressions changing. First came surprise, then hesitation, and then pale realization. I kept my composure, letting it unfold naturally. I didn't point, I didn't shout. I just smiled as the room echoed with congratulations that weren't scripted by them, but earned by me. And in that moment, their eyes met mine. Wide, unsteady, and finally acknowledging something they had refused to see for years. Later, at the family reception, my parents tried to speak. My mother's voice faltered, my father's words trailed off. I listened politely, nodding as they stumbled over apologies and praise that had been withheld for too long. I didn't need to respond. They had seen it all. I had built the life, earned the recognition, and staged the moment so carefully that no denial could erase it. It was subtle, but undeniable. I had taken the narrative they controlled and rewritten it in public. I had transformed years of neglect into a singular, unforgettable moment of validation. Their faces had gone pale not because of anger, but because they had finally recognized the truth. They had underestimated me, ignored me, and yet I had risen anyway. Walking away from that stage, I felt lighter than I had in years. The satisfaction wasn't in revenge for revenge's sake. It was in proving to myself that I could thrive, that I could be acknowledged, and that I could take control of my own story. I had taken pain and invisibility and turned it into empowerment. And for the first time in my life, I felt fully seen. After graduation, life shifted in subtle but undeniable ways. My parents didn't openly apologize, not at first, but I noticed the change in how they looked at me. There was a quiet respect now, a recognition I had waited years for. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was real. For the first time, I realized that I didn't need constant validation to know my worth. What mattered was that I had built it for myself, brick by brick, effort by effort. My brother, meanwhile, struggled to reconcile his path with mine. The gap between us had never been so visible. Not because he had failed entirely, but because I had succeeded without any support, without shortcuts, without a safety net. It wasn't about gloating, it was about contrast. He had always had a cushion, while I had learned to soar despite the odds. The public recognition I received, mentors, faculty, and the hiring manager, opened doors I never imagined. Job offers, networking opportunities, and invitations to speak about my journey began pouring in. I had transformed years of invisibility and neglect into momentum. Every handshake, every congratulatory message, every professional nod became a testament to what I had endured and overcome. When my parents finally tried to speak about it, I listened calmly. I didn't need long conversations or hollow praises. Their silence had taught me patience. Their oversight had taught me resilience. And in that quiet space, I understood the most important lesson. Sometimes, the most powerful recognition isn't given by those who ignore you. It's earned by your own hands, and witnessed by the world in a way that can't be denied. I had claimed my place, not by force, not by anger, but by building a life that spoke louder than any words could. The invisible child had finally stepped into the light. And in doing so, I didn't just prove them wrong. I proved to myself that I was unstoppable. Sometimes the ones who ignore you teach you the hardest and most valuable lessons. My parents' favoritism, their neglect, and their disbelief could have broken me. Instead, it became my fuel. I learned that true strength isn't handed to you. It's earned in silence, in struggle, and in moments no one sees. Recognition from others is fleeting, but self-respect lasts forever. I didn't need my parents to validate me. I needed to prove to myself that I was capable of greatness, even when love and support were withheld. That graduation day wasn't just a ceremony. It was my reckoning. The child they overlooked became the person they couldn't ignore. And that power, the quiet, undeniable power of proving your worth, is something no one can ever take away. This is revenge untold. Where every secret finds its reckoning, don't forget to subscribe.